Good afternoon, everyone. We're here for the November meeting. It's a joint meeting, well, it was scheduled as a joint meeting of the Seneca County Industrial Development Agency, the Economic Development Corp., and the Seneca County Funding Corp. Unfortunately, we do not have a quorum for the EDC portion, so we'll just go through with the IDA meeting followed by the Funding Corp. Meeting. So to start with, Kelly, if you could just do a roll call for the record.
Mr. Brusso?
Present.
Mrs. Srencione? Present. Mr. Bruce Murray?
Here.
Mr. Tom Murray?
Here.
Mr. Trout?
Here.
Mr. Wadhams?
Yes, here.
Mr. Shipley? Mr. Kime absent.
Okay. First item on the agenda is the meeting minutes. Everyone had a copy in their packet. Any comments, corrections, changes? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mrs. Srencione?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Tom Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Trout?
Yes.
Mr. Wadhams?
Yes,
Mr. Shipley and Mr. Kime absent. Motion carried.
Next item is the financial statements. Everyone has their packet. Guess there's just a few more critical items on here. First page is Bob Kernan went down and broke down on the sewer line. Sometime very shortly, hopefully, we'll be finalizing.
I signed the transfer documents today, so
Congratulations.
thank you. It's very exciting. So now we just need the county manager's signature and the town of Seneca Falls supervisor's signature, but we're essentially closed on the
Okay.
sewer line transfer.
So we'll have an entry for the month of November to take care of that
Take care.
transaction.
So as you,
It'll be a below line item.
Yep.
Reflecting the different, well, we eliminate the asset from fixed assets, we eliminate accumulated depreciation, and the difference between the two will be the loss on the transaction.
so it'll be somewhere, as you can see, somewhere in the 680-something thousand
Correct.
range will be the loss. So that's where that is, finally, after almost a couple decades. Next page, the balance sheet, where the only major item is in September dispersed $8,500 as part of the loan to Schrader Farms, and there's just a little under $2,000 remaining to disperse, and then that'll be closed with that particular loan. Other than that, going a few pages in, there's a page variance explanations, probably about halfway through, and it's just, as you see here, although it shows income being, decently under budget, we plan on a few closings very shortly.
Yes, so now that we've done official approval of the Trulina pilot, we would anticipate that closing probably before the end of this year. We're still anticipating the home leasing project, which was approved by the board last year to close as of this year, although we've followed up with them to make sure they're still okay to close in December. So we should be seeing, some income coming in either this month or next month associated with those projects.
So then, and on the expense side, we're slightly under budget for expenses, which is good. And then just as more of a FYI, if you look at the following page, towards the bottom under fixed assets, it just shows where it's listed where under fixed assets, the A106 infrastructure, that's the sewer line, that'll be disappearing. And then below that at A114.3 is the accumulated depreciation on the sewer line. So that sort of reflects it. It's a lot to go through these things, but and so our total assets will, fixed assets will drop next month.
Total will drop.
Yeah. So any questions or comments on the financials? Hearing none, could I have a motion to approve?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
Kelly?
Mr. Bruso?
Yes.
Mrs. Cerancione?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Tom Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Trout?
Yes.
Mr. Wadums?
yes,
Mr. Keim and Mr. Shipley absent, motion carried.
Okay. Next item is the Governance Committee met. Governance Committee is Tom Keim, Bruce Murray, and myself. We met October 22nd. It's one of these sort of end-of-the-year things where the Governance Committee goes through all the existing policies, new policies, to either add, modify, or approve policies with no modifications. So with that, Sarah?
So we have a few sort of what we're calling new policies, and even though we've had a local labor policy for a few years now, we've made substantial changes. So these changes were recommended for approval by the Governance Committee. Essentially, it's establishing a 70% local labor requirement of businesses. The IDA would enter into an agreement with a consulting firm to do the actual monitoring of compliance with this policy. The fees would be paid in total by the companies, and a fee structure is based on the frequency of monitoring. There are exceptions that can be made if 70%, if the 70% local labor threshold cannot be met. So as of right now, the two waiver instances outlined in the policy are if the project requires specialty contractors, or if the lack of available local labor is going to significantly delay or hinder the project. I did meet last week with the owner of the consulting firm, and he mentioned adding one more modification, which would be that for projects that are subject to prevailing wage, that they should not in turn then be subject to local labor, because there is a double reporting burden, and the projects that would be subject to prevailing wage are going to be significantly large in scope and in construction worker needs, and would likely need to apply for a waiver because our area is just not necessarily big enough to accommodate for the number of workers that would be needed. So that was his recommendation based on experience and working with a lot of IDAs. So I put that forward to you all for consideration. Maybe we talk about the prevailing wage policy, and then we can discuss what his suggestion was. So in terms of prevailing wage, this is a new policy that we have to institute under New York State law, that IDA assistance is now going to count as public monies in a project. So any tax exemptions, even arguably savings on lower loan interest would count towards this. So the policy as of right now is that projects with a total project cost of $5 million or more that receive a benefit package valued at 30% or more of the total project cost would be subject to New York State prevailing wage. Now, we've defined the project cost to be the cost of construction and reconstruction as specified in their pilot application, the estimated cost of engineering and architectural services, and other. So it'd be the sum total of those three things. That does not include equipment purchases, that does not include the property acquisition or land purchase price. So that's sort of our definition. Again, we would work with contractor to actually do the monitoring of compliance, which for this law is quite involved, because as you may or may not know, prevailing wage is set regionally, and it's set based on the job classification and the job being performed. So there's not just one wage in the Finger Lakes, there is a wage based on the job that's actually being performed on the construction site. So that's that project. based on these thresholds, not very many of our IDA projects will fall under prevailing rate. It would be very few.
The Trelina project would.
Trelina would, I believe, they already are subject to it because of their other assistance that they've received.
What about the Keystone?
Keystone, I don't believe that our benefits we're granting them meet the 30% threshold. So while their project total is quite high, they don't meet that second criteria. And regardless, we're on our agenda today is final approval for the Keystone project. So this policy would apply to projects coming to us basically with new applications from here on out. But yeah, so none of our current projects that were not already subject to prevailing wage would be under this threshold.
So I have one question.
Yeah.
So in an unusual project like Trelina, where the tangible monetary benefits are fairly focused in an upfront construction period, does the fact that Trelina is subject to prevailing wage rates by the state and its application of solar projects approval, does that mean Trelina is, I mean, we're hiring someone to audit or keep track of whether or not Trelina is employing the maximum number of local workers, which I think is fair to make sure they are, but does their prevailing wage requirement supersede that, which means all that work could be performed by people, 100% of the workers could be potentially not residents of Seneca County?
Hypothetically, yes. So to be perfectly clear, because we are looking at implementing these policies now and making significant changes, neither of these would impact any of the projects that are currently before us for final consideration. So we would not impose the new 70% threshold on Trelina or Best Made or Wilkins or Keystone or any of those, because it wasn't in our original documentation when it was provided to them. So, you know,
But
they
we-
applied with a certain, you know, assumptions and certain agreements that were pre-included in our application.
But we're not in a position to audit them for those.
So we will not be auditing them for those. They will be, if they're already subject to prevailing rate through their other agencies, they will be audited through those. Our auditing is going to come in the future, so any company that now comes to us for assistance, this policy is going to be included in the application for financial assistance. They will see this. We will figure out whether or not they meet the prevailing rate threshold. If they do, then we move forward with the compliance monitoring for that. If they do not, then we move forward with the compliance monitoring for the local labor. And we collect in advance, upon closing of the pilot agreement, we would collect an escrow fee that would cover the monitoring for the duration. And then that gets paid out over time to the consultants as they provide the monitoring. And then if there's any funds left over in the escrow account, it goes back to the company. So they're paying for everything, we're just holding on to it
So
in the interim.
the consultant will be doing the actual review.
Yes, the consultant will be
And
doing
they'll
all of
provide
the
that to
actual
us,
review,
yeah.
so that includes site visits, like they'll actually have to go out on the construction site and, you know, make sure that the workers that are there and that are doing certain tasks are being paid appropriately for those tasks in the case of prevailing rate. In the case of local labor, obviously they'd have to make sure that the people that are there are local as defined in the counties that we've listed in the policy, so on and so forth. And then that does require some burden as well to the employer, who would be, again, providing any documentation and paperwork directly to the consulting firm, who then would be reporting and delivering results to us, so that things can be communicated to the state as necessary for our annual reporting requirements that we'll have.
And in turn, we would report those findings to the board, correct?
Yes, yep, so if anybody were not to be in compliance with this, we would bring that to the board for discussion, certainly about whether or not they should continue to receive their benefits, because obviously lack of compliance would put them in jeopardy.
We didn't have a policy to monitor all this before.
Nope, so before our local labor policy was sort of a good faith of,
Okay.
we'll hire locally. There was no real threshold, so there really wasn't anything to enforce. What we're proposing is a lot friendlier than what other counties have. So Ontario County is 80% local labor requirement. Monroe County is 100%, and I don't believe Monroe County actually offers waivers for anything. So we're trying to grant some concessions to companies in recognition of the fact that we're smaller, we have a smaller labor force.
Yeah.
We do have a fairly large area listed here, including, Monroe County. So hypothetically, we should be able to avoid having to provide waivers to companies, but we do have these provisions in case of extenuating circumstances.
So this is, when you say friendlier, it's friendlier
To the business,
that is seeking to
yes.
invest some amount in this area.
Yes, so it's not meant to detract people, and ideally, the 70% threshold should be able to be met no problem, but if for some reason it were, that's when the waivers, could trigger. And the consulting firm would also take care of the waiver requests on our behalf. So if a company said, oh, we need 40% of our local labor money or 40% of our construction labor costs to go towards specialty contractors, so they're not meeting that 70% rate, that would be taken into consideration by the consulting firm. They would actually reach out to local unions and other contractors to say, hey, can you do this work? Or is this really a specialty trade that they need to bring in from elsewhere like they say it is? So the firm would take care of all of the sort of vetting of these so that we don't have to internally have the burden of verifying whether or not a request is legitimate.
And I think is the firm that we're proposing to use the same one that Ontario County uses?
Same one that Ontario County uses, same one that Monroe County uses, same one that I think Livingston County uses. So they're familiar. They've done this for a long time with a lot of other IDAs in our area. They do it with, IDAs downstate as well. So they're very experienced in this and certainly know what they're doing.
Is that the Loki Grill?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions about either policy? Any questions or concerns about modifying it so that if a company is subject to prevailing wage, they are not subject to local labor?
Again, I'm in the minority. I don't know if I'm in the minority here, but on these projects where we're providing material financial benefits, it would just be a shame if a project like Trelina, which is sold to our local community as a large infusion of labor to construct that, to find very few workers from the local area on that project. It just would be, I don't know, it seems like on the surface it would be a big disconnect.
Yeah, and I understand where you're coming from on that. His case was that because we don't include counties like Onondaga, which is really sort of equidistant to us as Monroe is, and some of our unions that service Seneca County are actually based in Onondaga County, that we would potentially run into issues just by virtue of that when it comes to local labor on a large project, because you're talking about hundreds of construction workers.
No, I understand that. There aren't enough. I understand. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, so
There's some logic to it.
I'm not saying your concerns aren't valid. His only point was that it's not often that you see both policies sort of simultaneously where a company is subject to both. because there is a lot of reporting and paperwork that's required of the company to demonstrate their compliance. And then that may be a detractor for businesses looking for assistance from us, was the only point. So it was a suggestion. It's not something we necessarily have to do, but something that, you know, obviously when the governance committee discussed this, there was the question of business friendliness, and Tom Keim specifically had pushed for, you know, with the job market now, obviously everybody's stretched thin, you know, we shouldn't, or we should allow for the waiver if local labor isn't available, and it would significantly delay construction. So that was sort of along the same vein of this is another way to alleviate some potential burden.
And I think, yeah, some of the large projects like the Del Lago project had a local labor agreements
Yes.
built right in. There was nothing that, we were just completely out of it.
Our
It was done
local
separately.
union leaders are not the type to let these kinds of projects slip through
Yeah.
without getting their people on the
Yeah,
job.
Absolutely.
But even they sometimes have to draw union labor from a little bit outside of the region or from other locals in order to service a project of the size that we would be talking about when it comes to prevailing wage, simply because they're very busy right now,
Right.
kind of like everybody is. So
I can live with the addition of the prevailing wage conditions, as long as we keep track of it. I mean, we have to look at it, and again, it'd be helpful at some point to have a sit down with the auditor and just get his sense of it too, but I can support it.
okay.
And I think this, the one thing that, you know, I had a few questions myself on this whole thing, and it's new for us, it's new for, you know, counties in New York. We're not the only ones part of this, and certainly this upcoming year will, you know, I'm sure some of this will be part of the projects this upcoming year, and we can always review it this time next year if there's anything that looks like, well, you know, we need to make a revision, whether we find it or other counties. And Sarah's in good contact with other IDAs and sharing the same issues. So if people see issues, people see problems, we can come back and change. It's not like we're making this permanent
And we're not
forever.
even necessarily locked into this for all of next year. If we start to see issues with either policy, how they're written, you know, we can come back at any time and revise these as necessary. So, you know, certainly from our perspective, this is a learning experience and something we can be flexible on and, you know, start like this and sort of see how it goes, see what feedback we get, and then iterate from there as necessary.
In other words, it's a work in process.
So work in
Yes.
process, you know, we were warned, what was this, about 2 years ago or so, that this was coming down the line, and
Yes,
that's why
and then New York State's been very slow on the guidance, especially regarding the prevailing rate. So we're sort of doing the best we can by that. But, you know, like I said, there's always room for change, always room for improvement, and we think that at least this is a good starting place to go from and to see how it goes.
So with that said, with the proposed modifications, can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second? So Kelly?
Mr. Bruso?
Yes.
Mrs. Srenzion? Yes. Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Tom Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Trout?
Yes.
Mr. Wadums?
Oh, Steve?
Steve, you might be muted.
I was muted. Sorry about that. Yes.
Mr. Shipley and Mr. Keim absent, motion carried.
Okay. See, next one, policy with modifications.
Yep, so this, we're proposing to make just one modification to our existing administrative policies and procedures. You have the one page that shows the modification. It's just adding in that a year or two ago when Bob Aronson was still around, that he and the IDA had decided to opt in as a public employer into the New York State Paid Family Leave Program. That's just making this clear to all IDA employees that that program is available. Are there any questions about that modification?
Okay, hearing none, can I have a motion to approve?
So,
And yeah, second, Tom, second. Okay, Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mrs. Cerancione?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Tom Murray?
yes.
Mr. Trout?
Yes.
Mr. Wadums?
Yes.
Mr. Keim and Mr. Shipley absent, motion carried.
Then the next set, as you see, is a long list of established policies with no modifications.
Yep, so I'll just very quickly read off what they are. I think you all received a link to Dropbox if you wanted to read the policies. Kudos to you if you did. It's a lot to get through. So the policies that we're proposing to keep without any modifications for the new year would be the Audit Committee Charter, the IDA bylaws, the Code of Ethics, Conflict of Interest policy, Capitalization policy, Disposition of Property policy, Equal Opportunity policy, our Finance Committee Charter, our FOIL policy, our Governance Committee Charter, Investment and Procurement policies, Records and Retention, Sexual Harassment, Supplies and Equipment, our UTEP, and our Mission Statement. Any questions or comments?
Hearing none, need a motion to approve the existing policies with no modifications.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second.
Okay, Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mrs. Cerancione?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Tom Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Trout?
Yes.
Mr. Wadums?
Yes.
Mr. Keim and Mr. Shipley absent, motion carried.
Next item is nomination of 2022 IDA officers. Currently, I'm the chair and treasurer of the IDA. Steve Wadums is vice chair and secretary. The committee met, Governor's Committee met, and proposed a slate having myself continue as chair and treasurer, and Bruce Murray step in Steve Wadums' roles as vice chair and secretary. This is just sort of the nominations. We'll actually vote on officers at our January meeting. So this is here. If someone, definitely, I'm sure if someone wants to volunteer, nominate themselves for one of the positions, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, during our January meeting, we'll vote on the slate. So, any other comments on this, or if not, the self-evaluation of the governance committee?
So at the governance committee meeting, they approved this evaluation to be presented to the full IDA board. It's just a summary of the governance committee's activities for the year. Just to sort of briefly review it all, the governance committee hasn't proposed any changes to their charter or their guidelines for the year. There's been no documents disposed of, and there was one governance committee meeting in which they discussed the following: so the new prevailing wage policy, the modification to our local labor policy, the modification to our administrative guidelines, review of our other established policies, review and renewal of the professional service contracts, and then nomination of the officers. So more or less all of the things that we have discussed or will be discussing shortly.
Yes, which leads into contract renewals for professional services. Everyone received their packet here. So we can just quickly go through.
So I will go through quickly which contracts are being proposed with no changes from the current year. So there's 3 of those. Fisher Associates, which authorizes the IDA to spend up to $10,000 annually for engineering services. That doesn't mean that we're committed to spending that much. It's just sort of a pre-approval that would allow us to do so if things came up. We have Ellie Beatty, our bookkeeper. So she does our bookkeeping for the IDA, the EDC, and the Funding Corp at a rate of $675 a month for 20 hours, and then bills us for additional hours at an hourly rate of 30. And then, let's see, the other two that are being proposed without changes would be Jim Armstrong, who provides our business retention and expansion services. His contract's limited to $15,000 per year. And then Finger Lakes TV for live streaming, which is $10,000 per year to stream up to 15 meetings. And then there's an additional $700 per meeting rate for meetings above that. And that includes board meetings, public hearings, committee meetings. So those are the ones without changes. There are two that are going to see some slight changes as proposed for 2022, and this is primarily due to the fact that the cemetery has been transferred to the county from the EDC. So the first is Dermody Burke and Brown, who does our accounting services for the IDA and the EDC on a monthly basis. So the contract being proposed for the IDA is a monthly rate January through November of $1,000, and then in December they bill us hourly because there's generally more work involved with closing out at the end of the year. And then the real change there is with the EDC, it's $900 a month for the IDA, and then $100 a month for the EDC for 6 months. So that's the change. And again, there's a change with Bob Kernan's contract as CFO. This would be for 12 months for both the IDA and the EDC. The IDA isn't going to see a change in the contract. That's staying at its $1,000 a month. The EDC would see the change with $250 a month instead of $500. Again, due to the lack of activity there because of the cemetery transfer.
So any questions or comments on either the contracts that will not change or the ones that have proposed changes? Hearing none, you have a motion to, unless someone wants to split something out, motion to approve all the contracts for professional services for 2022.
Motion.
Second,
Second?
Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mrs. Swenson?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Tom Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Trout?
Yes.
Mr. Wadums?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley and Mr. Kine absent, motion carried.
Next on the list, I'm sure is everyone's favorite subject, seeker review. This is about the most exciting thing you can ever talk about.
Pat's going to do this one. So this is for the New York Lodi solar project where we declared ourselves lead agency because in this case the town of Lodi did not require seeker or other real siting plans to be provided in order for the project to be approved there. So Pat, if you could walk us through the seeker.
Okay, in your packet was the seeker documentation. It comes in 3 parts. Part 1 is prepared by the applicant, and that's 13 pages. They filled it out and signed it and submitted to us prior to their initial resolution being approved. And then it's up to us, the IDA is the lead agency, to complete part 2 and then part 3. So if you will turn to part 2 of your packet, at the bottom it says page 1 of 10. And how this works is there are a total of 18 questions. The first question is either a yes or a no answer. If it's a no, you do not need to answer the following questions under there. If it's a yes, then you have to go and answer all the questions under that same number. The majority are no, but we're going to go through each one. The first is the impact of land. This is the proposed action involve construction on or physical alteration of the land surface of provided site? No. So we go on to question 2, which is impact on geological features. The proposed action may result in modification or disruption of or inhibit access to any unique or unusual landforms in the site. The answer is no. Question 3, impacts on surface water. The proposed action may affect one or more wetlands or other surface water bodies. And we answered yes to that. So by answering yes, we needed to go down and answer the following questions. However, they all were answered no. What happens then is we're required into part 3 that we'll go to at the end to give a statement as to why it doesn't affect it when we answered yes. So we'll get to that when we go to part 3. Question number 4 is the impact on groundwater. The proposed action may result in new or additional use of groundwater or may have the potential to introduce contaminants to groundwater or the aquifer. The answer is no. Question 5, impact on flooding. The proposed action may result in development of land subject to flooding. The answer is no. Question 6, impacts on air. The proposed action may include a state-regulated air emission source. The answer is no. Number 7, impact on plants and animals. The proposed action may result in a loss of flora or fauna. The answer is no. Question number 8, impact on agricultural resources. The proposed action may impact agricultural resources. The answer is no. Question number 10, impact on acidic resources. The land use of the proposed action are obviously different from or are in sharp contrast to current land use patterns between the proposed project and a scenic or aesthetic resource. The answer is yes. However, in going down to the questions, those were all no's, so that also will be addressed in part 3. Question number 10, impact on historic or archaeological resources. The proposed action may occur in an adjacent or to a historical or archaeological resource. The answer is no. Number 11, impact on open space and recreation. The proposed action may result in a loss of recreational opportunities or a reduction in open space resource as designated in any adopted municipal open space plan. The answer is no. Number 12, impact on critical environmental areas. The proposed action may be located within or adjacent to a critical environmental area. The answer is no. Number 13, impact on transportation. The proposed action may result in a change to existing transportation systems. The answer is no. 14, impact on energy. The proposed action may cause or increase in the use of any form of energy. The answer is no. 15, impact on noise, odor, and light. The proposed action may result in an increase in noise, odors, or outdoor lighting. The answer is no. 16, impact on human health. The proposed action may have an impact on human health from exposure to new and existing sources of contaminants. The answer is no. Number 17, consistency with community plans. The proposed action is not consistent with adopted land use plans. The answer is no. And the last one, number 18, consistency with community character. The proposed project is inconsistent with community character. The answer is no. So then if you go to part 3, which is only 2 pages, the first page just is the instructions. So on page 2, at the top, that's where we're going to explain why we answered yes to 2 of the questions. Upon review of the information recorded on the ZIF as noted, plus additional support information. Reference item 3. Local wetlands have been identified. However, they are not included on the U.S. Department of Interior maps or New York State DEC maps. Property development will be avoided in localized wetlands. Stream approximately 2,000 feet from project area. And then reference number 9, which is the other yes, intermediate forested area surrounding areas will be undisturbed during construction. So based on those comments and the answers to all the questions in part 2, it is recommended that be determined that this project will result in no significant adverse impacts on the environment, and therefore an environmental impact statement need not be prepared. And accordingly, thus a negative declaration would then be issued. So we will need a motion to approve
I have a question.
Yes.
the EAF. Yes.
So strangely enough, this is in my backyard, not literally in my backyard, but I live within a few miles of this. And generally speaking, everything that's described here I would agree with. The one thing that concerns me a little is, I think you, Don, mentioned there was a solar project in your area that seemed to be a little haphazard in its construction, and you were hearing from some of your constituents that it didn't really look like a neat and tidy installation.
The 318 project.
Correct. In the, I mean, again, if we're the body that's actually, because there's no zoning in Lodi, it's a pretty free-form place down there. In the event this project becomes, unreasonably haphazard, the construction, the design, the use of berm, the use of trees and screening, all the things that visually make these, I mean, there's nothing, I'm a big supporter of solar. I really, really am. I think it's great. I think there's a way to do it, and then there's a way to do it on the cheap and in the kind of haphazard way. I don't like to impose sort of onerous requirements on just regular people, but if it's handled improperly, and again, I don't have any experience with this, but I don't know what the feedback from what you heard was. Are we sort of saying, however you want to build it, it's fine, put a fence around it, and we don't really care?
I think a major issue with the 318 project is the amount of traffic that goes by that area. And they got real exposure because of the proximity to 318. It's extremely close to the road.
Yep.
So during construction, any construction looks terrible. But then their natural screening of the little pine trees they were going to put up, and then they died within 2 weeks, and then they left them up, did not help at all. You know,
that's the kind of, I mean, again, no one's trying to be, I mean, everyone's doing the best job they can. Sometimes the best job doesn't always look like the best job. And in the event this turns out not to be the best job, we're kind of we're the ones that will be, if someone feels like this was handled badly, then it's on our desk in terms of aesthetics.
Although this project was approved, I mean, even though Lodi doesn't necessarily have it, there was approval through Lodi?
They received a building permit from, I think, county codes. And that
It
was
was really it.
the only thing that needed to be done as far as approvals.
The reason that the IDA has to be the seeker is there's no local,
Right.
town approval process.
And so.
That's, to answer your question, that's typically where the constraints on the development come into play. There's a
The
site
town.
plan, at the town level. There's a site plan approval process that has to be,
And in the absence of that, it rolls up to us.
well, unfortunately, the IDA doesn't really have, that's not really in our jurisdiction, so to speak. If that's a concern, then I guess the recourse would be to try to build that into the transaction documents to have, some sort of obligation on the part of the company to comply with, some sort of standard.
Screening. It's screening.
But that's something that I think we would have to, figure out what the specifics of that are so that we could, appropriately build it in, because we're not, this isn't a planning
This isn't
board,
a
right?
zoning board. I know.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
One
I
of
mean,
the things that I will say is that this solar developer is not the same one that's done the 318 project. Delaware River Solar, who's responsible for this, has done projects in Fayette. Obviously, there was
Same
a
one.
proper siting process and everything there, but we haven't received any complaints regarding the construction of that project or regarding the way that it looks. And then even before Delaware River Solar ever came to the IDA, they had already done, I think, 1 or 2 projects in Seneca Falls, which again, to my knowledge, have never had any issues. So I'd be hopeful that we wouldn't have that with this project. I think it's probably more tied to who the developer was. But, you know, as Rob said, if that were really a major concern, we could try to do something in our closing documents. Obviously, that does sort of turn us not really into a planning board, but that does, in some ways, you know, if we do that, make us more liable for any complaints or any, you know, issues within the community
The thing
about
you
the
have to think
project.
about is if there is a problem, then the recourse is to go back
To the
and
town.
try to extract the benefits, which, you know, you have to think about the cost benefit of whether you want to put the board in that position, right, if something comes up, so.
Just one. There's not as much traffic on this road as there is on 318.
Well, I mean, a big part of a solar project looking fairly decent is keeping it far enough off the road. You know, and I think that goes with any construction project, and the one that's out in Fayette looks fine, because, I mean, it's gotta be 500 to 1,000 feet off the road. So, I don't know what they're planning on, but if they get 500 to 1,000 feet off the road, it'll look like any decent solar project looks, you know?
It's right, looks like it's pretty close to some very infrequently traveled roads.
Yep.
Does the land that these plots sit on, most of them are on ag exempt land at the time,
Mhm.
does that stay ag exempt after the solar project is up and running? Or does it revert to a commercial?
Well, the pilot would override existing taxes or exemptions on the land.
It ceases to be ag exempt and becomes exempt by virtue of the IDA development.
But at some point, it comes back on the tax roll, right? It's not exempt forever.
Right. Right.
And it comes back on the tax roll as commercial?
So, you know, our standard pilot is 15 years. If you assume that a solar project's lifetime is 20 to 30, it would be on the tax roll as a solar facility for the remaining 5 to 15 years of the project, and would be assessed and taxed as such. And then once that land was decommissioned, obviously the family that owns it, that farms it, could go back to their ag exemption and everything else. But the property tax liability is assumed by the developer.
And they have to pay back the last 3 years of their farming exemption.
Right, after 3 years, right?
Yeah, they gotta go back 3.
Go back and
Yep.
bring that forward.
Yep.
Yeah. And who makes the assessor aware of that? Is the IDA responsible for making that?
So whenever we do a pilot, all the copies of our closing documents and everything are sent to the municipality, so they have a copy of the pilot agreement and everything else.
There's a form that we file with the assessor, it tells the assessor to switch the exemption to the IDA. so.
Okay.
So, any other questions or comments on the seeker? So,
Motion for approval?
motion approval of the seeker review, not,
Yep.
yeah, the next one will be for the project. This is just of the seeker review.
The seeker review and issuing of no impact.
Of no impact. So Tom made the motion.
I'll second it.
Bruce seconded. Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mrs. Spensione?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Tom Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Trout?
Yes.
Mr. Wadums?
Steve, you might be muted again.
No, I didn't hear my name. Yes, I didn't hear her though. Yes.
Oh, yeah, we were voting on the, voting on the seeker, the no impact.
Sometimes there's background noise and it gets muffled out, so it's breaking up a little bit. So, yep,
Okay.
I'm a yes though.
Mr. Keim and Mr. Shipley absent, motion carried.
So with that approved, the next item is the final discussion and potential approval of the IDA resolution for the New York Lodi 1 project.
So in your packets, you all received a copy, obviously, of the resolution itself, but also of the public hearing minutes. We held the public hearing on September 20th. We only really had a few comments in regards to this project. Some questions from a couple that owns property right approximately where the project is taking place. Their questions really were more related to planning and zoning. And, we advised them to have a discussion with the town about possibly, instituting in the future some more requirements so that their interests as property owners could be addressed through that process. The other comment was really more of a question again about the local labor issue on behalf of the Carpenters Union. Obviously, we have a local labor policy, but again, it really didn't have enough teeth, and with the changes that we're making today, it still won't apply necessarily to this project, but again, going forward, all future projects would apply. So that was the extent of the comments. This final resolution would approve the IDA's standard 15-year solar pilot, which is the base taxes on the property plus a $4,500 per megawatt fee per year, and the $4,500 per megawatt fee escalates at a rate of 2% annually. Plus, this would approve a sales tax exemption and mortgage recording tax exemption for the project. The breakdown of the estimated exemptions would be in total, a property tax exemption valued around $888,000 over the whole duration, sales tax at approximately $594,000, and mortgage recording tax at $36,000. And then again, just to remind you all, the cost-benefit analysis that we had previously provided showed a 1-to-1 ratio, which is common for the small solar projects. So for every dollar that they receive in benefit, there is a dollar of cost in terms of the incentives that are awarded. So this is fairly standard. Any questions or comments about the specifics of the project or the incentives?
Okay, hearing none. Can I have a motion to approve the Lodi 1 project?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mrs. Swenson?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Tom Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Trout?
Yes.
Mr. Wadums?
Yes.
Mr. Keim and Mr. Shipley absent, motion carried.
Next item is the discussion and potential approval of the IDA resolution for Keystone Mills.
So we were finally able to move forward with the final resolution for Keystone Mills. This had been delayed in part just because they were going through the seeker process with the town and county, which takes a few months. So they did receive their negative declaration, their no impact on the seeker, like we just did for New York Lodi. So that's been taken care of. We held a public hearing on September 22nd. Those minutes were included in the packet. The only attendees were from the school district, and it was just more questions about the pilot structure and how that worked. This pilot is based on New York State Real Property Tax Law 485B. So essentially the way it works is for 10 years, they pay the base taxes on the property plus graduated increase of the new value up until the last year where they're paying almost what the full taxes would have been. So based on that structure, their estimated total property tax exemption would be approximately $19,000 with a substantial sales tax exemption of about $1.4 million and a mortgage recording tax exemption of $116,000. And then just a refresher on the cost-benefit analysis, this project was estimated to bring $44 of benefits for every $1 in assistance.
Yes. Any questions on this particular one? This is just finalizing what we've discussed and went through before. So any final sort of questions or comments? I guess hearing none, may I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second it.
Kelly?
Mr. Bruso?
Yes.
Mrs. Swenson?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Tom Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Trout?
Yes.
Mr. Wadums?
Yes.
Mr. Keim and Mr. Shipley absent, motion carried.
Next is a report on the revolving loan fund.
So this is just for informational purposes. Twice a year, we have to submit a report to EDA, which is the federal agency that oversees our revolving loan fund, just to give them an update on the status of our loans, how much is in the fund. So to give you all an idea, when this program was first put together, our total funding was $800,000. That has obviously since grown, where our total capital base in our loan fund is approximately $1.145 million. We have 18, although it's now 19, I believe, but it was 18 when this report was done, and then we closed on Schrader Farms after this reporting period. So 19 loans that we've done in total. We have not had any delinquent or unpaid loans. Everybody is current. We have, as of when this report was done, we had approximately $835,000 available for lending. Again, this was done for the first half of the year, so since then it's changed a little bit, but we'll again review this semi-annual report once it's been done for the end of the year, and that'll be sometime in the spring, probably of 2022, that we'll review the update. Our current active loans, as of right now, are with Pine Tree Farms, Bonadent, and Schrader Farms. Hipshot had been making payments, but they paid off their loan earlier this year. So I believe those are the only three that are currently still making payments. And again, everybody has been fully repaid. We haven't had any losses in this program. Are there questions or comments about the loan report?
Okay. Next item, typically if Jeff was here, he would do a report from Chamber of Commerce. I don't know if Bruce, you have anything, or if Sarah has anything of major interest?
Well, I wasn't prepared to give a report. I guess I think if Jeff were here, what Jeff would report on is the fact that its operations at the Tourist Promotion Agency have set records for the county sales tax and occupancy tax. There was a meeting 2 weeks ago by the Board of Supervisors Committee on Tourism that recommended reducing the chamber's allocation of the county's room tax from 90% to 75%. Part A. Part B was to extend the term of that allocation from 1 year to 3 years. So this was a recommendation made to make some of the room tax monies available to other entities within the county as opposed to spending it on promotion. I think if Jeff were here, Jeff would say, when someone sets new records for tourism activity as reflected in sales tax and in room tax, rather than being throttled down, the idea would be to maybe give them a pat on the back and give them more. So the room tax issue is, as Tom knows, a ongoing sort of tug of war, and instead of doing it every year, it's now going to be every 3 years. The outcome of that recommendation will be decided at next Tuesday's meeting.
The only other thing I would add, I imagine Jeff would probably give an update on One Seneca. So we've continued to meet weekly with that group. As you all know, infrastructure survey was sent out to the community. We received approximately 74 responses from that. It was a couple weeks ago now, but Jeff, Mitch Rowe, and myself gave a presentation to the Board of Supervisors Special Committee that's determining the recommendation for how to use the American Recovery Act funding. It's come to our attention that the county is not proposing to use any of the $6.6 million they've received in the operating budget for next year, meaning that that's available for other uses. We put together a slate of about 5 infrastructure projects based on the survey results that were communicated and recommended for potential funding from the county through that source. Our next steps are to put actual dollar estimates with each of those projects and to do another presentation before the special committee at their December, I think it's December 14th or 15th meeting, whatever that Tuesday is. So that's kind of where things stand. It's looking, positive so far, and we're hopeful right now actually that our industrial park project is going to be one of those 5 that might be able to receive a portion of county funding, particularly for connecting mainline infrastructure utilities to the park site. And obviously we'll hopefully have cost estimates for those as part of the feasibility study that's being done currently by MRB Group. So that's sort of the One Seneca update.
Yeah, I would add to that, you're right. I mean, Sarah described it well, but in addition, the survey that the One Seneca group, which is really led by Jeff, I think it received 76 responses. The survey itself was pretty comprehensive. I think what you saw in that survey was a combination of county and town staff putting their 2 cents in, but you also saw a group of, I think, interested members of the community that, stepped forward and said, look, here's what we ought to do. There was a consensus, I think, around broadband, water, and sewer.
Mm-hmm.
My own feeling is that there needs to be some working committees around these topics so that it's not just floating at 5,000 feet, but needs to kind of be down at ground level. Because this effort Jeff undertook really derives from the IDA's strategic plan document from 19. I think there's opportunity for us to be more active in this whole process. Sarah's done a great job at the meetings, but again, it's feet on the ground sometimes that make it work. So I think it's off in the right direction. It's not just an effort to decide how to spend $6.6 million, but it's really to say, what's the long-term infrastructural plan for the county, and how do we create the plan, work on it, and get it done?
Yeah. So this was just a, preliminary, here's a immediate term thing we can work on, but obviously it doesn't stop with those 5 projects.
You gave the report to the committee.
The 3 of us did, so myself, Jeff, and Mitch.
And Dan, who's on that committee for the county?
For the
funding?
For the funding, I'm not sure.
It's
There was kind of
Mike-
random people keep
Mike
showing up.
Ferrara, Mike Enslow, Mike Reynolds, Joe Borst, I believe, are the 4. And then Bob Heisen attended as well. I believe those are the committee members, if I remember correctly. So, and they seem very interested by the survey results. Some folks from county facilities and highway were there as well and promoted a few of their items. But, the survey results and the projects that we've been proposing sort of encompass, what was found in those results. So it's a focus on broadband, sewer, and water, and also a focus on trying to distribute those projects sort of evenly throughout the county, so that there's some, in the more southern part, some in the more northern part. with the idea of what things are coming up in the immediate term and would impact hopefully the most people.
I think the real problem is that $6.6 million just isn't a lot of money.
Right,
You know what I mean?
that's right,
We could spend that down at Willard in one day,
right.
you know?
Yep,
Or you
so-
could send, Roy Gates, he could spend it in a day.
Right.
Bob Stuck could spend it in a day.
Sure.
You know, and it's kind of sick to say that 6.6 million could be spent that quickly, but
That's a
really,
true-
we could spend it in an hour,
Yeah.
any one of those
Well, and
3 departments.
And, you know, one of the projects that is being recommended, so the Village of Waterloo has been looking to do a water treatment facility upgrade. And they had initially budgeted and received financing, I think approximately 9.1 million to do the project. And then, you know, COVID, they got their construction bids back and the lowest bid was about $3 million more than what they have available. So they're wanting to tap into some. That's not to say necessarily that the whole 3 million would come out, but just to give an example of, you know, we could easily eat half the money available just to assist that project. And then as Don mentioned, the Willard sewer treatment is getting an upgrade, and one of the projects that's being proposed would be to use some of the American Recovery Act funding to help pay back the debt service, so that the people, the users in that line don't see quite as much of an increase on their bills as they otherwise would have. So very tricky. Hopefully everybody will get a little piece of something, but it probably won't be enough to
Do anything.
pay in total for a whole project.
Well,
So
in my town, I'm specifically, because of the paperwork that goes along with spending this money, I'm looking for what we're gonna just spend it on in one stroke of the brush.
One project.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's where it went. Here's your paperwork, you know, cause, you split it up too much and then just more paperwork
Yeah.
goes down the line, so. That's what we're doing, or will be
And
doing.
and you have to report on all that funding, how you spent it and all that too?
Yeah, oh yeah, there's a whole nother set of paperwork that goes with it. I'm just getting my engineer fill it out.
Yeah.
That way there's no mistakes. And if there is a mistake, they can go after them.
Right.
yeah, thank goodness for the county finance director. She's really the one on their behalf that's keeping track of all of the paperwork and reporting and everything. So
Next, Don, you have any further updates that you'd like to present to the board?
Not on American Recovery Act, but there is discussion right now about a water authority. There has been discussion about a water authority for a long time. 3 years ago, we went up to the Wayne County Municipal Building. MRB gave a presentation. It was a great presentation. It explained pretty well that you don't have to give up your assets to join a water authority. You can just buy water from another municipality, and the water authority can act as an intermediary. And they showed the benefits and how things can improve when one person's in charge instead of one little town fighting another little town fighting another little town. And basically the gist of it is that you don't get any upcharge, right? So one municipality can't charge you 17 cents on the dollar just by passing it through their town and their pipe. And we have that issue in Seneca County. Then the board changed, elections have consequences, whole new group came in. And at that time, right between that transition and the last election, we were actually awarded a grant by the state of $53,000 for a feasibility study on a water authority. And then 2 meetings ago, I guess there was a vote, and then the vote came down that they wanted to go with a different engineer other than MRB that had never done a water authority, and then told some of the new supervisors there were better options than a water authority. The problem is that the grant was for a water authority feasibility study, not some other study to see how this might work in a different way. So now we're caught in a catch-22 where we just had another election and we're supposed to have a vote, and now we're going to have to explain to a couple other new people how this works, and then we're still stuck with the other supervisors that don't understand that this is for a water feasibility study for a water authority, not to see how this might work on somebody else's imaginary land. So that's exciting. And then good news, I think Wilkins RV has already reached out and touched base with this board, but they look very poised to start construction. They want some assistance from the county as far as hooking into the sewer line, which we all know how the sewer line works with Del Lago and all that good stuff. So we'll see what we can help them with right now. There won't be any significant financial help, I don't think. They would like that to happen, but I don't know if the board's going to go for that. But we might be able to assist them with talks with Del Lago, talks with this board, try and get them hooked up to the sewer versus having to do some other septic, crazy raised bed situation. So it looks like they are going to develop. Then the sewer line, obviously, there was some sort of confusion about how we were going to pay the bill. I guess we never formally.
So that's gonna be done through the American Recovery Act, at least
Right.
that's the plan, is for the phase 1 and phase 2 improvements that are needed to use that funding.
Yep. And we didn't formalize it in public, but we talked about it in executive session. Like I said to everybody, I could have swore we already voted on this and it was done, months and months ago. And then we came out of executive session that formally said that's what we'll use some of the funding and get it taken care of. So
Yeah, so I don't think it's been formally decided, but I think it's pretty much more or less,
yeah,
that's gonna be part of the use. And in total, it was, I think, maybe like $200,000 was the estimate for both phases all in. So, it's not a significant portion of the total funding. And then, at least with Mitch, there was some discussion of whether or not some of that funding could also be used to help facilitate Wilkins tying in to the line that's currently owned by Del Lago and then putting that, into the entire system. So we'll see. It's coming along, seems to be making positive progress in that regard.
Yep.
And just so you all know, Wilkins, we have a public hearing scheduled for later this month and are anticipating moving toward final approval, I believe, in December, provided that they have all their seeker findings and everything complete by then. So.
Yep. And then other than that, we got 3 new supervisors that are going to be joining the board at the beginning of the year. So, well, actually not 3 new ones. One's an old one that he got back in. So, it shouldn't be as bad as normal.
That's what you said last time.
I know. Everybody always thinks it's going to get better and it doesn't.
Yeah, so we'll be reaching out to them in a couple of weeks to invite them in sometime in December, hopefully the IDA office, and kind of give them a rundown of who we are and what we do, and hopefully eliminate any confusion from the start, because I've already noticed that there is some confusion out there on the parts of the newly elected supervisors about, the relationship between us and the county and, how we operate. So hopefully we'll be able to start the new year off right, and looking forward to meeting them.
They're both relatively level-headed people. And then Bob was always a good supervisor. He was always supportive.
He was.
So I have high hopes,
Yeah.
but we're starting low.
That's
Oh,
right.
that's all I got.
Better to surpass
That's right.
expectations.
If you have a low bar, you're
Right,
bound to
you can only
exceed
go up.
expectations. So there is, no other business that we have?
No.
Do want to have one executive session for a couple items. So I request a motion to enter into executive session for the discussion of the medical, financial, credit, or employment history of particular persons for matters leading to the appointment, employment, promotion, demotion, discipline, suspension, dismissal, or removal of particular persons.
Motion?
Second,
Second?
Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mrs. Francione?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Tom Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Trout?
Yes.
Mr. Wadums?
Yes.
Mr. Kime and Mr. Shipley absent, motion carried.
So we're back live. Thank you, everyone. So what I like, we went and discussed pay increase for Kelly, and we'd like to have a motion to increase her salary by 3% starting January 1st.
So moved.
Second? I guess, Kelly, roll call?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mrs. Francione?
Yes.
Mr. Kime is absent. Mr. Bruce Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Tom Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Trout?
Yes.
Mr. Wadums?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley absent, motion carried.
Okay. So next favorite time of the meeting, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So we were adjourned on the IDA. So everyone, if you want, you can stay. We're doing the funding court next. Wow.
Mass exodus. All right, Steve, well, we will talk to you later. We won't keep you any longer.
All right,
The
thanks, Sarah.
suction is
See you
everybody
later.
leaves the room.
Bye.
I have this, I was reading them, I'm like, that's not
I don't think so. Everything's straightforward. So you can do a public modification to the local rate of prevailing wage.
Yep. Are you around this afternoon?
Yeah,
Okay, I'll call you.
sounds good.
Enjoy.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ron.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll start the Seneca County Funding Court meeting. So first item on the agenda, well, I guess just as a quick who's here, there are two members of the Funding Court, myself and Bob Kernan, and we're both present, so we have a quorum.
Perfect.
First item is approval of the Funding Court meeting minutes of October 7th.
So moved.
I'll second. I guess Kelly, make it official.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Mr. Bruso?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Then we have the same approval of the funding court policies, which are all established with no modifications.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. It's more or less the same list of policies as was for the IDA, and you both reviewed the list last time the funding court met, so
I
Okay.
would
unless
so
there's any
move
new
their-
questions.
their adoption.
Okay, I'll second. Guess,
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Mr. Bruso?
yes.
Motion carried.
Okay. Nominations, officers for 2022. We've proposed keeping the same. Myself is chair and Bob is secretary treasurer.
So moved.
I'll second. I guess what, just at this
You
point.
don't even need a roll call.
We don't even need because we can,
It's just the slate.
and then the governance committee's 2021 evaluation.
Yeah, so, I mean, you're both on the governance committee, so you saw this evaluation when that committee met, but I'll just review it quickly for the public. So the governance committee is not proposing for the new year changes to the charter guidelines. There have been no documents disposed of per our records and retention policy. And at the one meeting that was held earlier this year, there was the review of established policies and the nomination of officers for the new year.
Okay.
And there's no action needed on that.
Yep. And no other business and no need for executive session.
For
So
adjournment?
I'll second that. I guess all in favor?
Aye.
So we're done with the Seneca County Funding Corp. Thanks, everyone.